Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation of Demystifying Infor CRM version 8.5 for IT. Your presenters today are Scott Weber and Chris Halsrud, and I just want to mention a couple things before I turn it over to them and we can get started. We will be recording this presentation, so if you or a coworker that couldn't attend would like to view it later, that will be up on our website by the end of the week. If you have a request for me to send you a link directly, just shoot myself, Scott, or Chris an email, or go to info@customerfx.com, and we'd be happy to do that for you as well. We are also happy to answer any questions that you come up with during this webinar. So feel free to post those to the question pane, and we will get to as many of those as possible. If for whatever reason we are unable to answer your question during today's presentation, we'll follow up with you via email afterwards. So that is all I have, and I will turn it over to, I believe, Scott, you'll be taking the reins first.
Yes, thank you, Bree, and thanks everybody for joining us today. This is kind of part two of our introduction and demystification attempt for Infor CRM version 8.5. This one is slanted more toward the IT folks who do the care and feeding of the back end of Infor CRM, and it's absolutely too geared toward those customers who do their own upgrades. A lot of them will do it without the assistance of a partner. And so we thought maybe we could get some of your questions answered about what's different about this version than all the previous versions when it comes to the story about how do we do an upgrade. And the other kind of question we'll try to answer is what happens after you're on 8.5. And so 8.5 is the first version of Infor CRM where the statement is being made by Infor that it's once you get to 8.5, your customizations are safe or immune from being broken or overwritten from future upgrades. So we already know there's an 8.5.1 sort of under development or in development. And so the speculation is, and we have to say it that way because we don't know, we haven't seen a version newer than 8.5 to really know that it's going to work as advertised and your customizations are truly safe and won't be overwritten. We don't know that yet. We see the building blocks of that, and that's what Chris Halsrud is going to kind of talk to today and show us in the application architect. What does the structure look like and the procedures look like in an 8.5 system that can deliver on the promise that your customizations are safe?
Hey, Scott,
and yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Should we be seeing a screen right now from you yet?
Oh, I see. No, Chris will be sharing. I'm just showing your basic slide.
Just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. So that's kind of what we hope to show and answer today, to the degree that we can. So I'm going to ask Chris a few questions, and again, thank you, Chris Halsrud. If you aren't familiar with who Chris is, he's our Director of Development. He's one of our senior developers. He's been working in Infor for 20, I think, plus years, and is absolutely one of the most technically capable and talented Infor CRM developers on the planet. And so we're happy to have him be able to join us. He's very much in demand, so it was pulling teeth to get some of Chris's time to help us through this webinar today. I'm not technical, and so I really needed Chris's help to sort of do justice to explaining this. So I'm going to start out by asking Chris some questions. And Chris, if you wouldn't mind, I think probably just starting out with sharing your screen with Application Architect in 8.5, that'll get us on to the demo portion of this pretty quickly.
Sure.
So the first,
Brianna, can you stop sharing your screen?
Oh, there you go, Chris. You should be able to grab it now. So the first question I'm going to ask Chris, I'm going to pretend I'm kind of in your shoes here today and ask a few questions to sort of make this somewhat methodical. So Chris, based on the fact that we've done, hundreds of upgrades for our customers over the years. And for the most part, there's a fairly typical and standard set of procedures and steps that we would go through to get somebody from, say, 7.5 to 8.4, 8.0 to 8.2 to 8.4, wherever we're going. Sometimes you have to do multiple hops. You can't upgrade from like older versions to newer versions without taking intermediary steps. But the question of the day here is, let's say they're starting from, let's call it 8.4 something. What's different about the procedures and steps to get to 8.5 today?
Sure.
And so there's the first question.
Yeah,
what
so
else do we have to do?
the process and procedure to get to 8.5 really is no different than any previous upgrade. Upgrading to 8.5 requires that you essentially start with an out-of-the-box 8.5 version. So the upgrade path is you have to be on 8.4, and from 8.4, then to get to 8.5, there's a conversion utility that you run, install some bundles, but then the next thing that you have to do is to restore an 8.5 project backup of the virtual file system. So everybody, when they go to upgrade to 8.5, essentially starts with an out-of-the-box 8.5 version. And then what you have to do is then to reapply your customizations back into that out-of-the-box 8.5 system. So the process really is no different than any other previous upgrade where you have to identify your customizations, preserve those via a bundle or other means, and then reapply those once you get through the upgrade process.
And Chris, has anything changed in 8.5 related to a LAN upgrade for those customers using the LAN exclusively or maybe in combination with the web?
No, the 8.5 LAN upgrade is essentially no different than any other upgrade. As I said, there's the upgrade steps. Some of what you need to do is to apply the traditional like LAN bundles, which adds database schema elements and things like that. But to upgrade to the LAN, that's really no different at all than what you've done previously.
Okay, so the next question is, what is your interpretation of what is meant by the upgrade safe statement? That's a statement attached to 8.5 from Infor. And so in reality, what does that mean? And I guess the other question is, how does it work? If you would be able to show that to us in Application Architect here, well, what does it mean? How are they accomplishing upgrade safe, if you believe that that is actually happening? And I think we do. So yeah, show us how does that work?
Sure. Yeah, and that's really the kind of the meat and potatoes of what 8.5 is, as opposed to previous versions of the system. So the big shift in 8.5 is that the customizations that you make to the web components are now stored separately from the out-of-the-box components. So starting in 8.5, Infor has split the virtual file system. The virtual file system is the table in the database that contains the entire web model. So all of the components, the forms, the entity model, all that stuff is contained in the virtual file system table. For the first time, they've introduced another table called the VFS data table in SQL. So all customizations, instead of writing to the virtual file system like they have previously in 8.4 and earlier, when you make changes through the application architect, your customizations are being written to the VFS data table instead. So the virtual file system table is largely remaining unchanged by what you're doing. There are some things that do get changed within the virtual file system table, but by and large, everything that you do is written to the VFS data table. So if we take a look in here, and I won't get into it too deeply, but what it basically has in the VFS data table is essentially the same type of thing that you would see in the virtual file system table. The virtual file system is really again, how they store the components that you see in the application architect. So it's essentially a hierarchical structure, that defines the different entity models and packages and things like that that you have within the project explorer of the application architect. So what it has in this new VFS data entry is essentially a parent ID that points back to the out of the box component in the virtual file system for a standard thing that has been modified by you. So we can see it here on this screen that these two items were some standard component that have been modified. All these other items that have a null value in them, those are brand new components that were added to my system. So it's a brand new thing that isn't modifying an out of the box thing. So the idea behind all of this and where Infor comes up with the upgrade safe approach is any future upgrades that Infor provides, when you install those, you will just be updating the out-of-the-box components in the virtual file system table. The data that's stored in the VFS data table will remain unchanged and untouched by the upgrade. So in that way, like for instance, if you were to update the account detail form in the application architect currently, and you were to add, let's say, a new phone field or something onto the account screen, if you then had Infor release a new upgrade and that upgrade contained the account detail form in it, when you applied that bundle, it would essentially wipe out your form and replace it with, again, the out-of-the-box account detail form without your new field on it. And if you wanted then to get yours back, you would have to install a bundle that contained yours. So with the new system, yours will just stay in place and will stay the active version. And the out-of-the-box account detail form, if it was upgraded during one of the updates that Infor provides, would be upgraded, but it wouldn't overwrite the customization that you have in your system.
So Chris, what happens for brand new, net new, like entities and screens that that didn't start life as an out of the box form? How are those handled in a future upgrade? Are they just ignored?
Yeah, so anything that's net new will just stay in the VFS data table and again not be impacted by any changes that are being made by the out of the box upgrades. So the net new customizations as well as modifications to the standard components all remain in your VFS data table and are all untouched by the future upgrades. Now, there are some things that are shared in the virtual file system. For those of you who know kind of the details of how the data is stored in the virtual file system, the actual entities themselves, like the account entity or a contact entity, those components, everything that makes up what the account entity is, not the forms underneath it, but the actual account entity. So the properties, the events that are tied to it, which events have actions tied to them. All of that stuff is stored in a single file for the account entity in an XML file. If you were to add a custom property to the account entity, so you add a new field to the account table and you add that property to it, that property actually gets written to the single account XML file in the standard virtual file system table. So unlike net new things or changes to, say, an account form, changes to the actual account entity itself actually get written to the standard virtual file system table. And that's because there is only one file for that. So Infor couldn't separate those components out. So one of the questions with future upgrades is how exactly those are going to be handled. The assumption is that if Infor were to release a update like to the account entity, you wouldn't lose your custom properties that you've added in there. It would essentially be merged, but that's something yet to be determined. You know, future upgrades may potentially affect that, but the idea behind this upgrade safe approach is that for those things that actually do still exist only in the virtual file system, those won't be disrupted by future upgrades.
So I know, Chris, we have to sort of speculate because we don't know the answer, but if we were to speculate and let's say there's an 8.6 or an 8.5.1 or something coming from Infor, is if you were to you know, use the upgrade safe nomenclature and what we know about how this works, would I be able to just apply the update and not build a bundle containing my customizations? Is that what doesn't have to happen in upgrades after 8.5? I don't need to preserve my customizations. I can skip the process of that.
Yep, that is the intention, is that, you know, once you're on 8.5, the whole process of identifying what's been customized and preserving those things throughout every upgrade no longer apply. That all you simply need to do is apply the next upgrade, whatever that is, and everything stays as is. And again,
Okay.
speculation, but that's the intended design behind this. The one thing to note with that, though, is because when you create a custom thing, let's say you modify, again, the account detail form. If you were to modify that right now, you would be creating a modification to the out-of-the-box 8.5.0 account detail form. So whatever functionality is on that form is what would be on your custom form. So it's an entire copy, essentially, of the account detail form. It is created in the virtual file system table. So what you have, or I'm sorry, in the VFS data table. So what you have is a full copy of the 8.5.0 form with your customizations on it. If in a future version, let's say 8.5.1, Infor comes out with new functionality that they add to the account detail form, when you apply that upgrade, that new 8.5.1 account detail form would be added to the out-of-the-box virtual file system table. But because you had customized the 8.5.0 account detail form, that one still stays in place and is still the active one. So when you deploy the new 8.5.1 version, you would still see your customized 8.5.0 account detail form. So potentially you would not have whatever new functionality is on the new 8.5.1 version of the form because your version was created from a previous version. So there are still steps needed to identify what the customizations are and if they are important enough to warrant either retrofitting your custom form with those changes or essentially starting from the new version and adding your customizations back onto that form.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The next question is, we know that Infor CRM Web you can modify the screens through the application architect, and I think most people choose to do it that way. But we also know that modifications can be made inline or using the editor that's part of the web user interface. So thinking ahead about 8.5, if I was to use that inline editor, the web UI, to modify, again, my account detail screen, for example, are those changes safe from future upgrades, just as the ones are that were done in Application Architect?
They are, yeah. So the inline edited forms, basically, if you were to, again, edit the account detail form through the inline editor, it would actually create a new entry in the VFS data table of the account detail form. So it would act just like you had done that through the
Okay.
Application Architect.
Okay. The next topic that I think I would like you to address for us is something we kind of discovered by accident, I would say, is that since 8.5 came out, Infor has published a couple of knowledge-based documents that provide hot fixes for specific issues under specific circumstances. And from what we have learned, that is going to continue. So they're going to continue to put onto the support site as attached files in the knowledge base related to individual corrections, bug fixes, that kind of thing. Can you speak about what you've seen there so far, Chris,
Sure.
related to those fixes?
Yeah, so typically in the past, recent past, rather than issuing individual kind of little hot fixes, Infor has issued one of 3 flavors of updates: SNCs, which are typically upgrades to the executables, core, which are supposedly changes to core components that aren't typically modified in the system, and then web model components, which are like the interface changes. So what Infor has started doing currently, and we don't know how long this is going to continue or not, but rather than come out with like 8.5.1, they've started to issue some hot fixes, like Scott mentioned, and those hot fixes vary in what they contain. So they might be an update to an executable, they might be a change to a screen, or they might be some change to some core component. So all of the hot fixes are right now linked on a single incident. So if we go to search the knowledge base here, and the number is 2201482. You can also search for 8.5.0 and you get that. But what this contains here is basically just a summary, and hopefully this will continue to get updated as new hotfixes are added. But this particular knowledge base article links what these things are. So this one, there's a zip file, and then there's a couple of other zip files. This one has this conversion utility fix has an update to the executable that's used by the 8.5 upgrade conversion. And then the application architect, this is an actual update, I think, to the application architect executable. So if you were to click on any of these links, it would take you to the individual detail of these Infor issues that generated this particular hotfix. But you can also come to the attachments of this overall knowledge base article and choose to download the various components. Some of these, again, aren't like web manifests that you install. Like this conversion utility is actually just the exe to update that conversion utility. So what you'd have to do is download this particular file and then replace that executable that's in the standard program file sales logics directory with this new updated one. These other ones are web manifest zip files, so you'd have to download those, then apply them to the application architect and get those installed. So it kind of depends as far as what you need to do with these various files. And I think the various original hotfixes or articles do talk about what you need to do to apply it, but they're pretty straightforward. Usually it's either a single executable like the conversion here or their different web manifests that you install.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered everything, Chris, that we were kind of hoping to today.
Yeah, just wanted to, we didn't really get into the differences in the application architect interface here. Just wanted to touch on those real briefly. They don't really
Sure.
impact the overall use, but it's just a way of understanding kind of how this is, how the application architect has changed in version 8.5. So if you go into the normal, Project Explorer here, one of the new things in 8.5 is going to be when you do customize something, you can see a new icon here. So like the account details form under the account entity has been modified in this system here. So you see that there's a new icon that's different than the other forms. So all the other forms that don't have this little edit paper icon thing are out of the box, but these two are your customizations. If you ever wanted to get rid of your customizations, there's no obvious way of essentially handling that. But what you do is you basically just delete your custom component. When you delete your custom component, it'll go back to the out of the box. So it won't be that you no longer have an account details. It'll just simply be that the account details is back to out of the box. So that's how you kind of undo your customizations or remove them. You won't be removing the out of the box thing. You'll be removing your customization. The other big change to what's in the entity model or in the application architect is within the support files within the various portals in the application architect. Infor has decided to essentially hide all of the standard components that they don't want you to touch. So that includes things like all the DLL files in the bin folder. So under the SLX client directory, all of the out of the box DLLs like the business rules and the various components that are in there no longer show up here. You can see basically there's nothing under the bin folder. Some of the other files that they've chosen to hide are CSS files. So you don't see any of the CSS files in here anymore, as well as JavaScript files. So any JS files that are out of the box are hidden. If you were to add a custom JavaScript file or CSS or whatever, they would show up, but all the out of the box ones are hidden from this interface. They're still in the virtual file system and they still get deployed to the site. They just no longer show in the interface. The idea is that they don't want you modifying like the out of the box JavaScript forms. They want you to override functionality in those with your own extensions. And then same thing with CSS. Those style sheets, they don't want you to modify those. They want you to basically create your own that override them. So those are some of the changes within the application architect.
Sounds good. Well, that's awesome, Chris. Appreciate that explanation of all that stuff. Is there anything else you were planning to share today, or should we move on to the Q&A?
Just one other thing for those people who do work with exported entity model. So rather than working within the database VFS, like when we develop, we use source control to track changes that we're making. So we use a file-based VFS, and in the new 8.5 system, if you were to do that, I deployed the out-of-the-box entity model to just a file-based system. So what you end up with are now two files or two folders. You have the model, which is the out-of-the-box entity model. So it contains all of the normal stuff that you would see in a file-based VFS. And then in your custom one, you also see the same type of things, but if you were to expand out, the entity model, application entities, and then go to like contact, for instance, in this system, I haven't modified anything with contact. So there, there's no custom code files or anything in here. And under the quick forms for contact, there's nothing here. And that's because it's essentially out of the box. So the file-based VFS does create the structure, kind of a skeleton structure of everything that's in the out of the box VFS side of things, but they're all empty until you actually start to add customizations to that. So for anybody that's familiar with working with the file-based VFS, it is a bit different in that capacity.
Great. Thank you, Chris. The one question we have is Richard is asking about our custom loader and activity modules and whether or not they're still compatible with 8.5.
They are, yep. So those custom loaders and the activity modules and things, those essentially get they get injected onto the page separate from the standard thing. That's the nice thing about like the custom loader, is that you don't have to modify out of the box things. It basically just adds, whether it be style sheets or something to the page automatically. So all those things continue to work without issue.
Great. Well, that's all the
Scott,
questions we had.
No,
yeah.
Actually, we do have one other question.
Oh.
And this one is, Infor told us to log out of Application Architect after a build, then log back into AA before deploying, and to shut off IIS when deploying to speed up the deploy. Have you noticed that the build and deploys are much slower in 8.5 than previous versions?
Absolutely. Yeah, we all noticed that right away.
Yeah, the deployment for 8.5 is slower, I've noticed, especially when working from the database. And I think the reason for that is because essentially for every row in the virtual file system, it now needs to check the VFS data table to see if there's a corresponding essentially override for that. So rather than reading from one table, it's now reading from multiple tables to do that. And so it is definitely slower, especially doing the database one. Using a file system VFS, it doesn't seem noticeably slower doing it that way. I'm sure just because the IO is faster than doing all the database queries individually. So that is the case. And as far as opening the application architect and closing it and doing all those things between the builds and the deploys, I've definitely noticed that, especially like in 8.4, that if you try to do builds and deploys consecutively without shutting things down, a lot of times you'll run into out of memory error. And then you have to shut down the application architect and reopen it and then do your deploy anyways. That still exists in 8.5. I've run into that a couple of times still. So that is definitely something that is an issue that Infor does know about. Infor is working to create a 64-bit version of the application architect, which I think is intended to alleviate those problems. But
yep. Yeah, they definitely are. They talked a lot about that on our latest partner call, and some of the other new things that are being built and intended to be into a future release here. So we'll blog about those things, and as soon as we know more information about them, we'll post it. And then eventually we'll do another one of these webinars for probably the next release, which I'm guessing will be 8.5.1 sometime in the next few months here. But there's a lot of cool things coming that they're working on. So we love to see that stuff. So any other questions, Bree, before we wrap it up?
No, it looks like we're good.
Great. Great. Thank you again, Chris. Thanks everyone for joining us. And as Bree said, we'll post the recording on our website as soon as we can here. And if you missed the first one, that's already up on our website too. And that kind of goes through all the new features and functions that are available to you in 8.5 from a user experience